Hi, I'm Dara, and this is A Right Way. I want to dive into something that's a very touchy topic, especially for us as creatives. How do you handle criticism? And this is something that's inevitable for all of us as writers. The more traction you gain, the more people that read your material, the more you're going to come across some challenging and difficult notes. And it's not always easy to hear that feedback, but it's an important part of the process. So I put criticism into two different categories, and I'll talk about some of the ways that I process it and handle it on a personal level. And maybe this can also aid you in your journey as a writer. So, number one, let's talk about criticism on a script that is very close to your heart. Let's say you do take the time and you write that spec script. So you've given up weekends and you've given up some evenings and time with family and friends, and you've been working on this for months, possibly even a whole year, and you finally finish this script. And who do you hand it off to? Maybe it is a friend or family member that you really care about and you're excited for their feedback. And of course, they have a busy schedule too, and they finally get around to reading your script. And typically, you can tell right away that they didn't really like it because they may preference their critique with something like, okay, maybe they find one thing that they thought was positive, like, oh, that was an interesting twist at the end, but you kind of lost me, or it took a long time to read this, or I just wasn't connected to the story. One of the toughest criticisms I ever got on a script that I wrote was the scenes are this, and I'm quoting here, the scenes are flat, the characters are flat. I don't care about anybody in this whole story. Like, to hear this critique, it was soul crushing at the time. And I mean, now I've heard so many different critiques along the way that it just doesn't sting the same way it did earlier in my career. But let's rewind back to the example of you sharing a spec script that you completed with a family member or friend, and they're giving you some pretty rough feedback. So the first thing you need to ask yourself now, and I feel like this is all a part of the process, but it's important to get as much feedback as you can and to not just lean on one person. So I suggest when you finish your script that you try to share it with at least 10 people if you can. Now, of those 10 people, maybe only five or six of them, and these could be people who are very close to you, maybe only five or six of them will take the time to actually read it. Sometimes only three or four, right? So you want to have a pool of more than just one that you can share with. And of the people that actually read it, you want to, listen to everybody's notes and kind of take it in with a grain of salt, because you know the story that you're trying to tell. So you don't have to absorb all of the critiques and notes. But if, for example, four people read your script and three out of four of them have the exact same note, or three out of four are confused about something, then as a writer, you may have to step back and think, all right, this might be a valid note. I may need to factor this into my rewriting process. Now, if three or four people read it or five people read it, and only one person has a particular note, then you're going to have to make the assessment on if that's one that you agree with and if it helps to tell the story that you want to tell, or maybe that's just that person's individual opinion. And that's one of the tricky things about criticism, right? Because uh, critiques are just as unique as fingerprints. Everybody has an opinion, right? Just like everybody has a fingerprint. So everyone's going to have different taste, and you're not writing a script that's meant to please everybody. You know the story that you want to tell in your heart, but you shouldn't be closed off to valid notes from people who did take the time to actually read your script. So if someone reads your script, the first thing you want to do, even if they're giving you like a stinking critique that hurts, you want to thank them for taking the time to actually read it, because sometimes it's actually harder to get a script read than it is to get a movie made. Very few people actually want to sit down and read a script. So keep that in mind, that they devoted time to read your script, make notes, and share with you. And if it's a family member or friend, it may be a little awkward and uncomfortable for them to share as well, because they like you as a person, but they just weren't feeling your story. And everything ain't for everybody, so that's okay. But at least be thankful that they took the time to do that. The second thing you have to ask yourself is the critique something that you agree with or disagree with? You'll have to weigh your options there, and also see if several people have like a consensus. Sometimes when I share scripts, there may be some kind of consensus note, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a criticism. There may be a consensus on, a lot of people are excited or agree with something, or think that, wow, Dara, this was really working in the story. You should probably expand on that. So it may not necessarily be a quote unquote bad critique, but if there is some type of pattern that's emerging amongst several people that read your script, you have to take that in objectively. Now let's talk for a second about if you're hired to write a script and you get notes and feedback and it's crushing. Okay, number one, if you're hired to write a script and you're being paid by someone else, you are a steward of delivering that story to the best of your ability, but you're responsible for making sure that it matches with the vision of the person who hired you to do the job. So in that instance, you kind of have to just take those notes and, keep pushing until you get to a better draft that makes the production company happy or the individual producer happy. And those rounds of notes and rewrites, you can go back and forth for a while, because that's all a part of the process of being a professional writer. You have to continue to be upbeat, positive, even if you disagree with it. It's still your job to deliver and make that script and craft that script so that it fits the needs of that production company or that producer. And if it's a note that you are like adamantly against, you can make the judgment call on if you want to actually challenge that producer and say, I don't really agree with that note, and here's why. But if you go down that road, you want to make sure that it's something that you firmly stand on. And you have to understand that, there's a risk that you might lose out on that opportunity if you're too resistant to the notes. So you have to strike the right balance. And it's really all about your values, the story that you want to tell, and, keeping things in perspective. So for me, for the most part, I'm open to notes and trying to infuse and improve everything that I can when I'm hired to write a script. But every once in a while, I will push back on a note, because I feel passionately that the story should be told in a different way. And sometimes that has mixed results. Oftentimes, the producer may ultimately disagree with me, and that's the way it goes. But there are moments when you have to stand up and speak your truth. And then there are moments where you have to take those notes and get back to work on that next draft, because that's what a professional writer must do. So as you continue in your writing journey, keep these notes in mind. Try not to take the critiques too personal, even though it feels like it's an extension of yourself, and maybe it does hurt that someone has torn into your piece so harshly. But as you continue, I remember one of the writers that I came to admire, and this was actually a novelist. He said that when he first started out, he would panic about every one-star review that he got on his debut novel. But he went on to write about 10 or 12 more novels, and he said that he no longer uh, reads the one-star reviews. Instead, he just counts the reviews. So it doesn't matter if it's 5 stars or 1 star. He feels that if someone was passionate enough to actually, because so few people actually leave a review. Many people may read a book and maybe 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 100 actually take the time to write a review. So he feels if someone was actually passionate enough to write a review about it, that it provokes something in him. And he just counts them. So one of his books was pretty poorly ranked. It had about 2 out of 5 stars on average as far as the aggregate of the reviews. But he said he didn't mind because that book had like 500 reviews. So that meant that it was moving people emotionally, even if it was rubbing them the wrong way. He was provoking something with his writing, and that was his goal. So he definitely kept things in perspective, and I try my best to do the same. Hopefully, these things will help you to get going and push past criticism. And remember, each of these things that you write, you're going to continue to improve your craft. The script that you write next year is going to be better than the one you're writing today, and so on and so forth. So that's something else to keep in mind as you continue. Thank you for watching.